Hello, my name is Darcia Narvaez. I'm a professor of psychology emerita from the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, USA. And I'm here with Four Arrows, my colleague, who is a professor at Fielding Graduate University.
Hey, Darcia, good to see you. Most people think of religions as worldviews, beliefs, ideologies, philosophies, and to kind of get into where we're talking about, well, there's a lot of ideologies, philosophies, and beliefs, but they tend to form under some more deep common denominators, like, for example, anthropocentrism. We can look at this great diversity of cultures that all tend to put humans in a superior or one-up position. But then we can go into what we refer to as indigenous cultures, and we see a great diversity there also, but there's these common themes in which you will never see in anthropocentric. So these worldviews seem to be a starting place. It's not the what I call place-based indigeneity, which neither one of us really have been raised. We don't have the language. We don't have that knowledge, which is probably the most crucial to indigeneity in terms of sustainability.
And that
But
means that knowing the landscape well
yeah,
and
knowing
knowing
the landscape
animals
and
and plants and what,
yeah,
what helps that area thrive. So that's this place-based
yeah,
wisdom.
that's that place-based. And but the start, but there's so many places in the world where the indigenous people have been literally wiped out, or that they have lost that knowledge themselves, which is happening more and more, especially with COVID. What a tragedy that our elders are dying with the language, right? So, but that place-based knowledge is vital. And what we're saying is we have some knowledge and wisdom about the broader worldview that can help us not only be motivated to support indigenous people who are still struggling to save their lands and their cultures, but we can help people re-indigenize to whatever place they're in with a worldview that is not self-destructive.
Yes, and you refer to Robert Redfield's work, right? He describes two worldviews.
Yeah,
One that is dominant now, that really sees the cosmos as amoral and fragmented and not sacred at all. And then the other worldview is the commonality among indigenous peoples, which is that the cosmos is sacred, connected, enchanted, and moral, that if you follow its laws and principles with respect, then you're going to enhance the well-being of all.
exactly. And to know that there's the father of social anthropology, because we haven't been really friends with anthropologists over the years, but he was the first really from the University of Chicago to put this on the map. He called one the primitive worldview and one the metropolitan worldview. And in the 40s, he thought that there were three. There was an Asian, Eastern one, a Western one, and the indigenous one. But by the time he passed on in the late 50s, he said, no, the Eastern one has subsumed so much of the West that there's now only two. And he thought it was the saddest thing in human history that the dominant worldview had done what it's doing to the indigenous worldview. And so I think when we look at all the scholars talking about sustainability and climate change, you see them they're not talking about Christianity versus Buddhism or about constructivism versus, they're talking about these two worldviews. And I think now we've got to talk about it more from the perspective of your field of psychology, and can you talk a little bit about the importance of this from the earlier learning periods?
Yes, so I came to the indigenous worldview from my studies of early childhood and anthropology and ethology and neuroscience, and discovered that, wow, it matters how you treat a baby, because the baby's brain is so immature at birth for various reasons, and it grows so rapidly that every moment you can be infecting what their personality is going to be like, how their health is going to be, their trajectory for all sorts of things. And we've forgotten what it means to raise a baby to flourish, to reach their human potential. in the civilized nations. So what we call the evolved nest evolved to provide exactly what babies need to optimize normal development. And
And
that
how does that relate to the indigenous? How can you get the indigenous worldview into that important time of teaching and parenting?
that's where it starts, right? So the indigenous worldview is that of connection, of relation, of kinship. And that's what babies expect, you could say, figuratively. Uh, when they, after they leave the womb, they're expecting an external womb experience because they're like fetuses till 18 months of age. They, have so much growing to do. And even beyond that, the first few years. So you're developing the right hemisphere in particular at that time. And that's the seat of empathy, of connection, of realization, of energy in the cosmos, of transcendence, and all that. That the indigenous worldview, there's this kind of foundation for all the pieces that we talk about in the book that we're working on. Babies are ready to be indigenous and be part of the earth community, and they're just ready to learn the specific place-based knowledge, right? And also enhance all their capacities to, so their full spiritual being is open and grows throughout life. And what civilization does is they don't provide the evolved nest. They shut down that baby. They misdirect growth towards self-centeredness because they haven't given the nurturing that the evolved nest provides. And that's soothing birth, breastfeeding for several years, lots of caring and touch, positive touch, no negative touch, no punishment, no coercion. It's like, what? The civilization has gotten so far away from that, they can't understand how that could work, right? And then it's
Stay away from that tree and get out of the dirt and don't be near that frog, right? Too, right?
right. And they don't trust the baby's inner compass, which is actually there to guide the baby and the parent about how to grow that baby well. So you need to pay attention to whatever the signals are from the baby, and because the baby evolved to know how to grow well, and parents have forgotten to listen, really. And so there's lots of other caregivers besides mother that babies need 24/7 care, responsive care, keeping them in optimal arousal so that the brain that's growing so fast has the right biochemistry to grow the good stuff and not enhance the self-protective stress reactivity. And then nature connection and immersion is so critical for being a creature of the earth, to understand the signals in the environment of the particular place where you are, the animals, plants, winds, right? And to feel connected and place-based. And then healing practices, because we all make mistakes, and these are things that we see all over the world in indigenous communities. These practices of the evolved nest grow people to be happy and cooperative and moral and virtuous, and there and not destructive to the planet or each other. So maybe you want to talk about some of the indigenous precepts. We're writing about 28 of them in the book that we're just finishing, right? But there's many more.
We've been working on putting these precepts together, and my students are using the list of the original 40 list in almost all their classes now, whether it be systems thinking or whatever the course is, structural inequality. They're looking at, well, wow, what if this, we were on the right side of the chart instead of the left side, right? What if instead of rigid hierarchy, we were more non-hierarchical? What if instead of fear-based thoughts, we were more courageous? What if instead of not having a strong social purpose, we had a socially purpose for life? We talked about anthropocentrism versus animistic and biocentric, and all of these ideas where some people are there, but they know that they're contributing to and accepting systems and institutions that are really in this almost diametrically opposed systems of believing. A relative disbelief in spiritual energies, minimal contact, all of these kinds of things. We may intellectually think, well, no, I like animals, but are we really feeling a total equality in which, if anything, we see them as teachers? I mean, going deeply with that. Do we use words to deceive, or is that such we don't even have a language for the idea of lying? We're in that kind of of a world where looking at these precepts, looking at words as sacred, looking at an emphasis on this holistic interconnectedness with everything, becomes a way of seeing yourself situated in the world. It's not a philosophy. It's not something to talk about or do once in a while or pick and choose. And with the use of phenomenons of hypnosis, ceremony, which is a form of self-hypnosis, to really transform ourselves into a more fearless way of understanding, a more heart wisdom, as I think that was one of our chapters, heart wisdom. That I think is the solution that the largest study ever done by the United Nations in their extinction rate report. They said, there was 450 scientists, 50 different countries, 15,000 peer-reviewed papers. And, they were on the front page of every paper in the world for a day. And then it kind of got lost. But their summary said, it scared a lot of people that I know, 1 million more species will go extinct within a generation of all life forms. And yet, as you know, I wrote an article in The Nation called What the Media Missed. What the media missed was in that document, in 6 places, and I'll give one quote, they said, however, in places where indigenous worldview is still operating, and that means, with the language intact, and where they have control of the land, this extinction rate is non-existent or severely reduced. And when I saw that, I went, wow, this is what so many of us have been saying for so long, and why so many scholars like, Noam Chomsky says, if we don't get this, we're doomed. And yet here's this large study that came out that shows why 80% of all biodiversity on planet Earth today is on the 20% of land controlled by the 5% of people that have an indigenous worldview. I mean, what more do we need?
Right. And I think to move from to understand really that our current way of making decisions in our societies are in this kind of narrow, planful, deliberate, conscious way of thinking. And that's what's gotten us into trouble already. And the major religions and philosophies of the world have always pointed out that if you think too much, you start to think that's all you're about, right? And that it's a dangerous place to only be because it's so narrow. It only takes into reality what is manifest, what is material, what is measurable, right? But reality is much more complicated than that. And so it's the other parts of the brain and the other functions we have that are able to understand that things are more complicated, that life is dynamic, things are shifting, and that we're all connected. And you can see this in brain studies in failure, like Jill Bolte Taylor talks about when she had a stroke, and she's a neuroscientist. It was on the left side of her brain, and she lost the ability to speak, but it enhanced her capacities to see when it was the right hemisphere more dominant, to understand relationship and feel peace and joyous connection. So the indigenous worldview is trying to get us to remember our other capacities, to fulfill and have a more integrated brain instead of being in this little narrow schooled brain that we assume is the only thing, reason, right? And rationality is just, a lot of it is unconscious, subconscious. It's all the things we know and relate and associate, and our intuitions are built from our experience. If we don't have the right experiences, we don't build the good intuitions though. And we're not giving kids the right experiences now if we just send them to school. So we have to remember that it's a shift that we have. It's part of our capacities. Let's fulfill and enhance and reach our potential by helping kids keep growing in all the ways that they can grow, instead of just narrowly telling them to go to school and take tests and then get a job and make a lot of money. That's what's destroying the planet.
Well, I'm glad you emphasize, the experience. And I don't think this is, and I think you agree that this isn't really about, from an indigenous perspective, it's not about the brain per se alone. the spirituality, which is understanding the energies that come from outside of us, are so much a part of the things that you're talking about. Um, and I think that the challenge with neuroscience is the more it focuses on, laterality and looking at the science of what's lighting up when somebody is generous, or what's lighting up when someone is selfish, right?
Yeah.
As if that's telling us the deeper picture. But even if we could go deeper into the brain and nervous system, what's happening in our relationship and our connectedness from a spiritual perspective. And so, it gets into one of my students recently said, um, after I gave a presentation, I didn't know I could come to a doctoral program in the academy and be talking about that we were spirits inhabiting a body. I mean, it was like they blew their mind, right? And I said, yeah, well, that's what the academy needs to start talking about, right? Is this idea of spirituality and this understanding of the long picture, and the idea of what we talk about in one of our chapters about heart wisdom, referring to this deeper portal of profound interconnectedness and awareness that connects us to all living things. And I think that's a more difficult construct to bring into the audiences that we have, don't you think?
Yeah, I tried to do that with my students too. I'm retired now, but for the indigenous, the key to education is self-transformation. Are you a different, better person? Are you more attuned and respectful and wise from having this, whatever education it is? And that's not at all what higher education focuses on, right? It's just a semantic knowledge, very narrow kind of way of being a human being. And that's something that needs to change. And there's also a number of other things. I've wrote a chapter for the Handbook of Cognitive Archaeology called In Search of Baselines, because I think we get all mixed up about what's normal and what's typical for our species. And one of the things that many scholars do is they have a foreshortened view of humanity. They think that we started back in the kind of Sumerian civilization. Really, nothing real much happened before then.
Right.
Well, that's only 1% of our history as human in the human genus, right? There's a lot of pre-civilization where people live sustainably. And our current First Nations communities are part of that kind of trend of, or that aspect of humanity of living sustainably. And then the negative view of human nature that is really set up in early life when you're disconnected as a baby from others, you're forced to sleep alone or cry yourself to sleep. You're breaking the bonds right then of trust that the child has towards other people, towards themselves, because boy, it didn't work to cry. I guess I better shut all that down, any needs I have. And they don't trust the world, right? So already the civilized way of raising kids, too much in the US especially, is to create a negative view of human nature. And then the adults think, oh, yeah, that's the way it is. It's a dog eat dog world, because they experienced it themselves and they don't know any better in a way. So other biases are towards literacy, as if that makes you smart. That actually probably narrows down your smartness because it focuses you on linear thinking, and you're missing that, complexity of multi-dimensional, multi-perspective taking that is part of our heritage as well. And misunderstanding our potential as human beings is part of the whole thing.
I like what you're saying about how this saying that you hear often, oh, well, it's human nature, when we talk about going to war, for example, or when people are violent, well, it's human nature. Or even worse, you see a number of scholars who are saying we're much better now than when the savages were, and this is all poor. It's all poor scholarship, and has been exposed over and over and over again for poor scholarship. But even the good-hearted people, when they say it's human nature, they're going back, to Rome, maybe, and maybe they're going back to Samaria. I recently read an article by someone who said, the dominant worldview started with Samaria, where we left our nature-based worldview, was improved and polished by Rome, and the Anglos have continued to make a science of it, right? But it's not human nature, and as I quote you often, that for 99% of human history, we have lived in a different way. And when I first saw that I think you wrote that before I did, and I remember, I'm going to double check and see how this works on the history, and it looks like that there were hunter gatherers that we know, because we found arrows in bodies up to 1.5 million years ago. And so that would make it for sure 1% that we've been on this road that Robert Redfield says is an unfortunate and sad and tragic road.
Yeah. And I have your recent book, The Red Road, which has the chart of comparing the different worldviews in many of the chapters, so people can practice. Are you going to stay over there in that dominant view with rigid hierarchy and anthropocentrism, or are you going to go over to the other side, on your side, coaxing the reader?
I had to argue with the publisher on that, because they said, just can you put it in one time? I said, no, I want it after every single chapter. And now I'm getting feedback that says that's what makes the book work, is that every chapter people are rethinking and going back, and it takes 5 or 6 or 7 chapters before you really realize that it's all about moving from one side to the other. And like you say, it isn't happening in the universities. It's just not happening, and we've got to look at higher education, I think, to get to where you are with the place where it's really important, and that is the early years. But if higher education isn't teaching what you've been teaching, then the parents are going to continue the same kind of vicious cycle, aren't they?
Right. So we need to inform the educators about the importance of early childhood and providing the Evolved Nest. You can see more at evolvednest.org. And then we have to help educators throughout the lifespan to realize there's much more than book learning to be a human being, and to renew our connection to the earth. Nature connection is so vital, to feel, at one with the world around you, so that you don't want to destroy it because it's part of you, right? That aspect seems to have diminished in the decision makers.
Well, if we ask, I've done this many times. I've asked people at conferences to go out and touch a tree and then come back, and they look at me like I'm crazy. And then I say, I want you to do it again, but this time I want you to ask permission and wait for an answer. Then they almost laugh, right? But when they come back, I've done this for years, there's a silence, there's a somberness. And then when people tell me what they experience, there's always someone that cries. There's always someone that says, wow, I can't say that it talked to me, but I felt this communication. Some of them have told stories about the tree saying that it lost its relative in a hurricane. I mean, this was a troubled youth that had no thoughts about spirituality his whole life, right? And I say, well, imagine living that way 24/7, right? And so how do we transform back into this without just having it a semantic or an intellectual? And that's where, my acronym, the cat-fawn connection, if we look at how just 4 of the precepts, fear, authority, words, and nature, if we just look at what's the difference between how indigenous people understand fear, are they afraid of death or not, or, etc. How do they understand authority? Does it always come from an external source, or is it just personal reflection on experience under an umbrella of interconnectedness? How do they use words? Do they use them deceptively? Oh, we don't do that much, do we? Or do they see them as sacred vibrations? And of course, do they see nature, as my colleague Walter Block says, is simply utilitarian for the sake of human beings, right? No, they're sentient beings. If we can move into that place, then when COVID is talked about, instead of talking about the politics of mask wearing and vaccination safety and all the inequalities, which are all important topics, but we're spinning wheels with them because the cause of COVID, whether you go back to the pandemics of the 13th century or the 1918, have been deforestation, air pollution, and yeah, that happened during the wars in the 13th century, and the moving in and taking over the territory of animals and treating animals with disrespect in the current animal ranches that crowd things in. And the research is there to say that that's what's causing it. And this virus is trying to tell us, fix that and I'll go away. And it's not getting fixed. In fact, people have taken advantage of it in the corporate world. It's gotten worse. The Amazon has lost more trees than ever. And here we are, in a situation where the indigenous worldview is struggling. People are getting killed for struggling. And yet we all can do this now if we just start looking at the work of so many people and looking at the indigenous people who are out there trying to teach us.
I think the Wedico virus is rampant. So that's cannibalism of life, which the Europeans brought to the Americas and was rampant there before that. And Native Americans have always warned about that, right? That you can lose your soul to this disease, a virus, a mental psychic virus. And we have to heal now. And there's many ways to heal. And we have to be open to various ways. Every person's a little different as to what's going to work for them. But there's, talk therapy kind of thing. There's embodied medicine and various ways to use that. Shamanism is really coming back in various ways, and different peoples are sharing, indigenous peoples are sharing their knowledge with the white people. The red people said, right, the Native Americans said some centuries ago, well, yeah, these guys are going to come back and ask for our knowledge in the future. And I think now is the time it's happening, and it's getting wider and wider as more widespread because of so many crises we're facing now because of our loss of our indigeneity.
Well, what a great way to end, to say that prophecy is coming to bear, because certainly you and I are getting more and more requests to talk about this topic, and so are many indigenous elders that I know besides myself. So thank you, Darcia, so much for
Thank you. And
sharing.
are you going to play your flute for us? And that'll be our final.
Will.
Yes.
And can you want to set it up for me, or do you want me to just share? I'll just tell real briefly.
Yes. Go ahead.
On the Trail of Tears, this is a song the mothers sang to their children. And for those of you who don't know the Trail of Tears, you can Google it. But it was a tragedy, very probably worse than what we're experiencing now, except we're experiencing worldwide. But if you can imagine mothers reminding the children every day about all the beautiful things in nature they saw on this terrible journey. And that's the beauty of it. So when you listen to it, keep in mind that no matter how tough things are, if we look around, the beauty is there.
And we are part of nature. We are not separate. We are integrated into it. And even when we pass away, our elements become part of the next generations.
Absolutely, we are a part of it. Bye-bye.